I haven't watched this movie since it came out in theaters, and I did forget that they cut open Gwyneth Paltrow's head.
They do.
Just a little bit.
Quite graphically.
Yeah, that was pretty graphic.
Yeah. I have feelings about Gwyneth Paltrow. They'll come out.
Oh, yeah, we all do. We all do. She's been in our lives for so long. It's impossible not to. So as you guys know, I don't really know how to start yet, so probably going to be something like, welcome to Late to the Movies. I'm Ben Holton. This is a podcast where my friends and I get to fill in our movie blind spots. Every week, we'll pick a movie that either I or a guest hasn't seen before, but really should have by now. This week, well, we've been doing, I think a few weeks ago for the Shining episode, I mentioned that we'd only been doing like really heady kind of like downer stuff. Not that that makes it for a bad episode. I think those episodes are really fun. So the last couple have been a little more lighthearted. We did Wedding Singer, and then Batman Returns, and then a special episode on Encanto. But now we're going to keep that lightheartedness going and do something that is just pure escapism, just nothing but laughs. We're doing 2011's Contagion. I'm excited to talk about it. I actually haven't seen this movie since I was in theaters watching it. But first, before I get too far away from it, my guests this week, two people new to the podcast, only one of them new to the movie. We got Kate.
Hey, I'm Kate.
And Jeffrey.
Hey, everyone.
And Jeffrey, you saw it before. You saw it in theaters, and then you rewatched it last year, right?
Yep, that's right. Or 2020, I rewatched it.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's
right
not
after the pandemic
That's
started.
not last year anymore. Oh, no.
Yeah, we're in 2022
Oh,
now.
no. So, last year and change.
Yeah.
And, Kate, this was first time for you.
First time for me, yep.
And that is interesting because, I should say legally up top, everything you say is medical advice. Legally,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I work in public health. That's what Ben's referring to. But I somehow managed to not see Contagion until a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't know if it necessarily would have helped or it dissuaded you from trying to be in sort of like a public health position, but I don't know. Whatever happened, and now you're watching it for the first time now. But first, before we get into the movie, I usually start by asking about general movie-going habits. Since you guys are new, it doesn't have to be specific to anything you've seen recently, though certainly that would apply. But just kind of like, do you guys watch a lot of movies? Do you not?
I like movies a lot, and as you both can attest, I have a hard time sitting through them. So I haven't been to the theater in a really long time, but when I was going to the theater, a lot of my experiences were with Ben, and he is very good at picking out movies that I will stay awake through. So that's always helpful. But I have ADHD, so it's hard to sit through a whole movie.
I didn't even mean to steer it in this direction, but for like the 6th episode in a row, I get to reference Cats because we saw Cats together.
We did see Cats together. It was a wild ride.
It was a wild ride. How about you, Jeffrey?
I'm probably a bigger movie watcher than Kate. I probably watched less movies since we've been dating for a little over a year now. We've watched a lot of half movies, but I haven't been in the movies since the movie theaters since the pandemic started, so I definitely missed that. But back in the Movie Pass days, I was cranking through movies, doing at least one a week. So missed those days.
I would say it's the golden years, but it was really like the golden 8 months before that
Yeah.
that business model completely collapsed on itself.
For
But
sure.
fun times. That was a good time. I remember going to the Providence movie theater to see Sorry to Bother You.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when I found out that Movie Pass had begun limiting their service
Oh, no.
quite significantly.
Yeah, that was
Because
a
I
great...
was like, oh, it won't let me pick this on the app because now it says I can only watch these 3 movies.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wasn't it like literally one movie or something at
yeah,
one
it
point?
was. Yeah, it was really strange.
Great movie, though. And Ben and I learned that our suburbs were not cool enough to play it, so we had to drive further.
Yeah, that's been a problem with trying to catch some of the like Oscar baity type movies in the last couple months. Is you got to drive far or just catch them for the week or two that they're in Providence, but you never know in advance. All right, you guys seen anything recently? I mean, besides Contagion.
We just watched Don't Look Up.
Okay.
Oh,
That
we
was the
did.
most recent movie we
That
watched.
was so good. You're too afraid to watch it, Ben. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a big wimp. I've as people who've been really following this maybe too closely might know, I have been slowly conquering my fear of scary movies, but comets I can't do.
It is like too real.
Yeah. Or just like big metaphors. I can't handle them.
Yeah, it's an unveiled metaphor,
Yeah.
I'd say, but excellent. And that was one that I like was stuck to the screen.
Okay.
Jeffrey liked it, but thought it was a little long. I thought like every second was worth it.
Yeah. I didn't get quite as into all the characters in the storyline. I thought it could have been condensed a little bit, but I like the overall theme of it. I thought it was quite poignant.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like your perspective that makes it maybe you the best person to talk about Contagion, that I know at least, would also kind of make it so you relate a lot to Don't Look Up.
Right.
And sort of the experience of those characters trying to get people to
believe in
take
science.
things seriously.
Yeah, and it's complicated.
That
Right?
makes
a
lot of sense.
Science is complicated, but yes, definitely.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I will, once it's in Best Picture nominees, I'll have to watch it. So have to sounds, negative, but you know what I mean.
I'll watch it with you.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. So I'll put a minute on the clock.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll need it, but Jeffrey, let's get a plot summary.
So the plot summary of Contagion is, a lot of how you would expect a pandemic to go, because the movie is all about a pandemic. And it opens with us finding a few characters who get really sick and we don't know why. They're traveling internationally, I believe. And the movie follows a few different parallel storylines at a time. So we're kind of getting different views into this pandemic along the way as it progresses, as more people get sick. We follow scientists as they try to figure out what the virus is, where it came from, how to find a cure for it in the form of a vaccine. We follow the CDC and other public health authorities as they try to basically contain the virus, contain outbreaks, and make sure more people don't get it. And then we follow the lives of everyday people who are trying not to get sick and die, because this virus, unfortunately, is very fatal. I believe it's about 20% fatality rate. So much more scary than COVID-19 in that way. But other than that, very similar lines to what we've been living through for the past 2 years.
Pretty much exactly on the dot on a minute. Good job. Snaps all around. So this movie made a big resurgence, climbing the iTunes rental charts in 2020 after the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I was not one of those people who was really looking forward to revisiting it, but you did revisit it in 2020, right?
Yeah, it was some weird thing. I don't know. It was self-flagellation or something like that. But
yeah,
it's kind of I wanted something to relate to what I was living through, and kind of, I kind of knew it had a positive ending, I think, too. So I think that was part of why I watched it, because I was I hope our pandemic ends the way this pandemic ends in the movie, if you will.
With everyone really excited to get their vaccination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things to watch, was people just they had to institute a lottery system. It was that felt true for a second with the initial wave of COVID vaccines, when it was just healthcare workers and and the like. But of course, with all the vaccine hesitancy now, did not ring true.
Yeah, it's a little tough, but I wonder if you could just squirt it up your nose, if it would be, like in the movie, it's a nasal.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's different. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, would not. I don't think it would remove the microchip concerns, but definitely the needle phobic folks.
Yeah. No, the microchips they still definitely find purchase in your nervous system if you shoot it up your nose, just like Bill Gates wants.
Exactly.
So this movie comes from Steven Soderbergh, who's the director, and Scott Z. Burns, who's the writer. They worked together on the previous Soderbergh movie, The Informant, which is also with Matt Damon. And they were thinking of their next project. They wanted to work together again. And their first thought was a biopic about Leni Riefenstahl, the famous Nazi propagandist. And then they thought that the audience for that might not be so big. So instead, I wonder what would happen if an actual pandemic hit. And they wrote this movie. Scott Burns actually talked to a decent amount of, I'm not sure if they were specifically epidemiologists or just social scientists, about the more kind of societal impacts of what would happen. But they talked to actual scientists. And I think the general consensus at the time when the movie came out was, sure, they exaggerate some parts because it's a movie, but it's a good guess at what might happen. Yeah. And, fast forward 9 years later, 2020, COVID-19 hits, and they got a lot right, I guess.
Yeah. They did. Yeah. It was a good guess at what might happen.
Yeah. Before we get into kind of bigger picture stuff, specifically about the movie, Soderbergh in some of his movies does this sort of multi-narrative. There's no real main character. You're switching between people, and that's, I don't know if he's ever called it this, but it's called like hyperlink narrative. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to mimic kind of the way that people process information today, where there's all these different tracks happening at the same time. So yeah, I don't know. But a few of his movies are like that, and it is interesting, but the result is there's no real main character. You think maybe it's Kate Winslet, 62 minutes into it, she's in a trash bag in a mass grave. Yeah. I guess she's not the main character. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think structurally about the movie? That's one of the more interesting parts of it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a real interesting way to do it because there are so many facets to a pandemic. You know, I think if you kind of went a more traditional way and had one main character and followed them around, maybe it's, Matt Damon was a pretty main character and he's just a civilian. His wife is I think the first person to contract the virus. If you kind of followed him through, like, it could have been interesting, but there also, just would have been a lot of weird spots in the plot line. Like, I don't know, you wouldn't want to make him the hero or something. That'd be just a strange twist. And then also a lot of it at the time, he's just kind of just waiting for something to happen and waiting for the vaccine to come along, kind of living his life. So you check it back in with him a lot. But the real interesting parts are through other characters that you meet along the way. So I think that's really what's neat about the structure of the movie is you kind of go back and forth to kind of like who has the most going on at the moment and what's interesting for those characters.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the most interesting things about the movie to me was, in in keeping with, what happens during an actual pandemic, they're showing kind of the hecticness of it for everybody. And I think that sort of hyperlink, narrative style, as Ben called it, is a good way to do that. You're seeing like this person's actions are affecting this person, and you see, a person who was infected by Gwyneth Paltrow, you later find out, and then you're looking at the public health workers who are trying to kind of piece it all together. So I think it was a good way to show kind of what a hectic feeling a pandemic is. And I found it really interesting.
Yeah, you definitely get that from, like you said, Matt Damon being the sort of civilian level, the not misinformation necessarily, but lack of information leading to panic and confusion, and then outright hostility in some cases. And people at the CDC, people at WHO getting kidnapped.
Right.
And I guess the message is just like, don't cheat on your husband and you won't cause a global.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an anti-adultery movie.
That's the main takeaway. And then the very last sequence reveals to you that is a chef in the casino in Hong Kong, or is that in Macau? Or?
Yeah, that was Macau, actually.
Yeah, it was Macau, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't wash his hands after touching a pig.
Right.
Yeah, that was pooped on by a bat or something, or bat pooped in the food, I think.
Yep, that ate a specific banana.
Exactly. I think the bat dropped the banana and the pig ate the banana.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, but that moment was so interesting because I feel like at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, people were really searching for that moment, right? Like, what happened? And there were all these, thoughts about, was it a bat in a lab in Wuhan and they were doing coronavirus research and did it, whatever. And then someone ate the bat. And I think there was such a desire, at least at the beginning, to like grasp onto a moment like that. And we will probably never have a moment like that. So that's one of those, movie things that can't happen in real life.
Yeah. It's basically just like, they're never going to figure this out, but you get to know because it would probably be annoying for audiences to go home. It's an interesting choice to end on that. Whatever, we'll jump to the end. Matt Damon and his daughter have that sequence with the prom thing that he does for her. A real thing that happened. So
yeah,
Totally.
I think at that point her boyfriend's vaccinated, right? And she's not vaccinated yet.
Yeah, I thought that was such a sweet moment in the movie because I think we all remember like the oh, can I hug you again moments with our friends. And just that kind of hint at some semblance of not quite normalcy, but intimacy and some kind of inkling of what was and what you've been missing out on was really, really sweet.
Yeah, so that's basically where the movie ends, but then they show that last sequence, just to, I don't know, it's a much more unnerving ending. So
right, could have been
so
happy
it's an interesting
living room
choice.
prom.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. I think it's pretty much a good choice, but whatever. There's a sequence at the beginning, and then they kind of do this throughout the rest of the movie without specifically, aside from that very final sequence, making it clear to you all the things that people are touching.
Yeah.
This is a virus that spreads on surfaces. And they show you without really putting too fine a point on it, but it's obvious enough that you pick up on it. They're showing like, she giving her credit card to someone, them running it through the point of service machine, and them shaking someone else's hand, putting an arm around someone to take a picture. And they're just doing that all the time. I think the part where it's the most like, okay, we get it, was when Kate Winslet calls the guy in Minnesota that's on the bus.
Yes.
Oh,
And he's like hacking up a lung and just like touching every surface as he's leaving the bus.
Every pole.
Yeah, he gets literally every pole he passes. But aside from that, I think it's pretty subtly woven in there.
Yeah. I mean, the part about the movie too that's definitely more frightening is people get very violently ill at the beginning, and some people die suddenly. They have like seizures. They start foaming at the mouth. That's like really scary stuff to me. Like, I think that really got me hooked in, and was like, oh my gosh, this is intense. And people are just dying, unexpectedly. When the boy, Matt Damon's son, dies in his bed, that was pretty crazy. So I think that's kind of one big thing about this pandemic. That's like, you're like, oh man.
Yeah.
It happens quick. It's hard.
The early deaths were really like extra frightening. I think Erin Mears, when her character dies, that seems more kind of like COVID-like to me. She wakes up, she's feverish, she's gasping for air, and it's several days of like a downhill slope. So that felt a little bit more relatable than like the borderline zombie-like situation with the kid of Gwyneth Paltrow's character.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that term, because when I saw this, my takeaway was that it's basically a zombie movie without zombies. And that's how I've described it when I've thought about it, or it's come up in conversation literally since I saw it in movie theaters. Definitely still feel that way. It gets a lot more into scientific process and how the political ramifications of, freedom versus safety and restrictions. It becomes more of like a political thriller, but the early part of it, especially most of the first hour, while people are still dying really violently, that are main characters or supposed main characters. Yeah, it's pretty freaky. Yeah, they do a good job. Especially the Gwyneth Paltrow death is really kind of violent.
Pretty intense. And the autopsy also pretty intense.
Yeah, I forgot they do that. They just cut her head right open.
I know. And like Gwyneth Paltrow being the first death in this movie was so interesting in retrospect.
I do remember that being surprising.
And she had COVID, right? Right at the beginning of the pandemic. And, my first thought when I saw this, I was like, oh, I'm going to Google Gwyneth Paltrow COVID, because there's going to be some good stuff there, just with her goop history. And it, I didn't find anything that she was like explicitly an anti-vaxxer, but what I did find was she has, some long COVID effects and has been recommending things like, keto fasts and things like that. And a higher up at NHS, reprimanded her for that. So it's just really interesting to see this is the, the patient zero.
She didn't quite get Jude Law. The government didn't run a sting against her.
Right. No, it seems like NHS was ready to, though. I think if she went more anti-vaxxer, they might have.
Yeah, it's anyone with a platform doing that. And that's, the Jude Law character. Blogs are evil. We all know this. And this is what can happen. It's funny to look at sort of, it doesn't feel like a ton has changed in the last 10 years and change since this movie came out, but to just look at what the internet looks like, literally like on a computer screen and what like a blog looks like, that's sort of the biggest difference, I guess.
Yes.
And they use the word blogosphere unironically.
Right.
Stuff like that. So you talking so much about Gwyneth Paltrow being in this movie, we can talk about the actors in this movie, because there's so many famous people.
So many.
Marion Cotillard is also in this, and another person who I looked up their thoughts on the actual real pandemic after I knew we were going to do this movie. I was like, I wonder what she thinks about it, because quite famously when she was doing her tour and promoting La Vie en Rose, which she won the Academy Award for when she was on that kind of campaign trail. It came out that a few years before that on some French late night program, maybe she doesn't quite think jet fuel can melt steel beams. Not too sure about the moon landing.
Oh.
She says it's all a misunderstanding. I don't speak French, so maybe it was like in a joke context that I don't understand. But it seems like some of the stuff she said pretty clear. But she does seem to take COVID-19 pretty seriously. She's one of the pretty big group of people who are in this movie that did PSAs back in 2020 when when this movie got like kind of big in the public consciousness again. Like her, Matt Damon, Jennifer Hill, who plays the one who eventually injects herself and figures out the cure. I think Laurence Fishburne is in there too. But so anyway, point being, it's funny that she was in this movie.
That is, very funny.
on the Wikipedia for it, there's a picture of her next to casts, and I think it says something along the lines of the caption under her picture of she was really excited to be in the movie because she's so terrified of diseases or something like that.
Okay. Oh, I feel like I saw that too. Yeah.
It's just like fun. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. We should talk more about performances than people. So who do you think's good in this? Big people, Paltrow, Matt Damon, Cotillard, Kate Winslet's in it a lot, Laurence Fishburne.
I thought Kate Winslet was great. It sounds like she did. I did a little reading on it. It sounds like she did a lot of research for her character too. That she was in the Epidemic Intelligence Services, which is a real thing, and it's like a postdoc. So her being kind of like on the ground doing that work, I think she did a great job, and she did a great job really making science accessible. Through her character, but she had to kind of get it to portray it like that. So when she was describing like the R naught and why that's important, I thought she was fantastic.
Yeah,
I really liked Jude Law's character. I think in 2011, it definitely wouldn't have hit home as much. You would have been like, oh man, this guy's just a wacko, and like, who's gonna believe this guy?
Yeah.
But after there's so many conspiracy theories in the pandemic now, like I think it really made sense. You're like, oh wow, this like really actually happens and really has happened here, and he's really just like a combination of people, in the U.S. media or however you want to describe it now, and it's just really interesting to see. And like it also is really interesting that he gets exposed as a profiteer essentially, and that's how he gets taken down by the FBI because he made up a cure just to make money from it, which is very satisfying.
I can't believe they have an ivermectin plot line.
I know.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah,
it is. They thought of everything.
They did.
I really like too when he like goes at Laurence Fishburne in that interview.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's on some TV show, like a PBS style show
something
or
with
something.
Sanjay Gupta, seemingly.
Right.
Yeah, and basically calls out Laurence Fishburne for spilling the beans to, I think, his wife or girlfriend, whoever it is, and basically like giving out insider info to certain people before he announces it to the public, and really did like a real public takedown of him. Thought that was real, like, again, another, really legit criticism if I'm being honest, but also like, wow, like the power of somebody who has information.
Yeah, absolutely. That's someone with a platform. It's we don't have to name names, but there's since 2011 at least a few people who have emerged that are those people who like do this fear-mongering thing that are on their own platform, who aren't allowed to be on Twitter anymore. Those kinds of, he would definitely have been banned from Twitter, for instance.
It definitely would have been banned. Yeah.
He maybe couldn't be on Facebook anymore. That one's dicier.
Right.
Depends who was paying him. Zuckerberg holding company. We don't know. So the Ardnot scene, is that what it is? Ardnot?
Ardnot, yeah.
Ardnot. Yeah. What that lady from Minnesota's Department of Public Health is just like really, really aggro at Kate Winslet the whole time.
Yes. And that was, you're talking about the person who was like, it's the biggest shopping weekend of the year. Yeah. That is
the Marion Jaws who doesn't want to close the beach, basically.
Right, exactly. And those moments really were interesting. The like, who stays home with the kids if we close businesses, and who, what are we going to do with all of the malls? And those are, I think, some of the more frustrating moments in this pandemic, at least for me. So it was interesting to see that personified so early.
Yeah.
And like all the talk about, what really is the enemy here is fear. And even, they're referring to the last pandemic as the H1N1, right? And that was still one of the most relevant things that folks were speaking about, at least in the US, right? We didn't experience Zika to a huge degree. So I remember people saying like, well, swine flu was not like a huge deal. Like
No one I personally know like got extremely sick or died.
Exactly. And like, however many thousand people died, but that's like not, I remember like in the very, very first
Canada
months.
got bad, right?
Did it? I don't remember.
Like Montreal, I want to say. I don't know.
My memory of swine flu is that my roommate in college had it and decided to stay and party for Halloween. So
it sounds like a college decision.
Sounds very UMass. Yeah.
But I think the, Minnesota public health lady, I mean, maybe she has a bit more insider knowledge than the average person, but definitely personified, in a pandemic, is you don't really understand the level that things get to. Like, obviously Kate Winslet's character is trying to explain how bad things can get. And I think for like 99% of people, you can't possibly understand that until you're in a situation. And that's why we got so blindsided 2 years ago, is because like no one understands a pandemic until they live through one, I think. And so it's easy to ask those questions like, what are we going to do in this situation? And why would we do that? And like nothing happened before. Why should we be worried now? So I think to me, that's who that character kind of represented, is like the real skeptical person. Yeah. That's like, is this really necessary? Like, why are you taking these like really drastic steps, unprecedented steps in terms of this lifetime?
For sure. Yeah. It's a thing like everyone's, the detractors are saying once you break the glass, that's pretty much it. I think from pretty much the first scene in the movie, you understand that people are dying from this disease.
Right.
But it isn't until like around halfway, maybe even a little more through, that the government is conveying the full kind of picture to people actually across the country, which, they knew a pretty good amount of time first. They sold their stocks and then they told the American people in real life. So
yeah, exactly. I thought to go back to get to the Laurence Fishburne's character, I think he's the head of the CDC, right? And him sharing the information with his wife, who then shares the information with a bunch of her friends, and kind of more people find out and who aren't really supposed to know yet. I think it's really interesting. Like, obviously that's like unethical and unfair, but like, it's also like, well, if it's life or death, like, would you do the same? I think that's what really is the question, right? Like,
yeah. Why does his fiance live in Chicago if he's in Atlanta?
Yeah,
that's the bigger question here. Yeah.
She just likes it there, I guess. I don't know.
Because it's not like he just like works in Atlanta. If he's the head of the CDC, I imagine he should live there.
Yeah, one would assume. I found him very forgivable. At the end of it, I was mad at his, what was it, wife, fiance,
I think.
Yeah,
Ben
I was fiance, and then because at the end they're like, he tells Bryan Cranston, we're going to have a ceremony.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I was mad at her, and I was definitely mad at her friend, who she was on.
Her friend clearly immediately went on Facebook, right?
It was like this woman posted a status immediately. But I was less mad at him. And I thought, you see the custodian kind of walk in on him telling his fiance to just drive to Atlanta. And the custodian is really upset and says, we all have people. But when he gives Laurence Fishburne's character gives his dose to the custodian's kid of the vaccine, it was like his way of making up for it. I had a soft spot for him. I think he was like
a culpa moment for sure.
Right. He was trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just speaks to the cast that Soderbergh gets in his movies. And in this movie in particular, the custodian's played by John Hawkes, who is an Academy Award nominee. The fiance, he's only in, I think, literally 3 scenes. Mm-hmm. The fiance, Sana Lathan, who is a really big deal also. She just had not a huge part, but a part on Succession's most recent season. And obviously loving basketball back in the day and a bunch of other stuff in between. So, it's just, I don't know. I probably would tell someone who's, if you have like this guy's fiance is in a city that he knows like tomorrow or next week or something, they're shutting down the border in the airport. You're not going to be able to get out. I'll be like, hey, just come over here.
Right. So I lived
in his defense, all he says is just come here.
Right. Just come here. Don't talk to anybody. Don't touch.
He doesn't really give her more actionable information than that. Obviously, the implication is there.
Right.
But she could have also just told her friend, he said maybe get out of the big cities, maybe like come down here. We have, she could have framed it differently.
That's a very boring movie though, Ben.
Yeah.
He could, I think in retrospect, hindsight here, but he could have like feigned an illness and been like, you have to come. I broke my leg or something.
Yeah, I broke my leg. You're going to need to drive me to work.
Right. I really need your support. I'm very stressed out. But so I lived in New York City at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and there were moments like that. There were rumors that they were shutting down all the bridges. There were like, none of it was real, but there were moments where everyone, and a lot of people did get out, a lot of people did leave New York City and just had
if
to.
You could afford to.
Exactly. And in my family, it was like, come home. And because I work on a hospital campus, I thought I should not come home. I've probably already been exposed to COVID. And I was, so I'm glad I didn't. But
lo and behold.
Oh, we should have mentioned this, but we were supposed to record this podcast a few weeks ago, and we couldn't because Jeffrey and I both had COVID.
Oh yeah, I didn't really think about the irony of that.
Yeah,
second time for me.
They're the perfect people to record with.
Exactly. Yeah. So
double COVID, worked in a hospital.
Yeah,
exactly.
We were inspired to do this movie by the Omicron wave, and then we got it.
Right.
Despite being vaccinated.
Yes.
Yeah.
all the boosties didn't help us.
So were you still in Portland when that happened?
Yeah, I was. I was living alone in Portland. I had just come back from LA from a trip at the beginning of mid-February, I think it was. And I remember talking to people in LA like, "Oh, do you think this like COVID thing's gonna like be a big thing?" And like I was like, no, I don't really think so. And just kind of spent my time in Portland. And then one day I talked to somebody whose wife was a doctor, and he was like, I was like, yeah, they're saying it's like just like the flu. He's like, it's not like the flu, it's way worse. And I definitely was like, had like a oh shit moment with being like, oh man, like this is probably actually really bad. Had a few breakdowns, I think. And then it really set in when things shut down.
Yeah, so my sister and I went on vacation in February. She's a teacher. We went during I think most of the East Coast has a February vacation the same week. And we were deciding whether to go then or an April vacation in 2020. Fortunately, we chose February. We went to London. And I remember thinking like, oh, I don't think we like ran into any Italian people, so we should be okay. I can only imagine what Italians think of Americans now. But,
Right.
At the time, it was like, wow, Italy's really messed up.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember just thinking like, wow, so we came back late February. By my birthday, March 18th, the week before, I had concert tickets to a show, I think on the 13th and the 15th. The 13th, I was kind of just like, you know what? I'm not going to go. It's fine. It was just a comedy show. It wasn't like that big a deal. I was like, yeah, I don't want to go. It happened anyway. I just ate the ticket cost. The show on the 15th, by then, the governor of Rhode Island had shut down every venue in the state. So that was the turning point right there. And it's like, well, okay, I guess this is happening.
Yep.
We're all going to have to go home for a couple weeks, and then we'll go back to work. And because that was the thinking at the time.
That was the thing. I remember someone on a team I manage at work, we were kind of gathering our stuff, and he was like, so when am I coming back? How much stuff can I bring? And I was like, I don't know. And none of us could have ever guessed. Still not back.
I definitely had a moment in my workplace. I have like 20-ish coworkers. And I remember specifically we'd all kind of there's sort of just like one long hallway in our office. And we'd all kind of gather there towards the end of the day and just sort of, when we were getting ready to leave and just sort of chat or whatever. And I remember kind of going down that hallway like a receiving line and just telling people like, okay, I hope I see you soon. I literally never saw some of those people again. A lot of them have left the office. So I didn't see them soon.
Yeah. No, that is wild. The people you only ever saw again in 2D.
Literally. Yeah.
I've been working remotely since like 2012. So like that part is totally lost on me, to be honest. I was like, well, I guess I was working from like a co-working space. I'm like, well, I guess I'm just working from home now on my computer instead of some random office on a computer, but still working on a computer and doing Zoom. I've been using Zoom since like 2015.
Yeah, you're ahead of the curve.
Early adopter.
Yep. My exit scene was very dramatic. I had like an external monitor in one hand, and I was getting a dress altered, like a floor.
So you were already looting at that point?
I was already looting at that point, absolutely. And I was getting a dress altered for a wedding. It was like a floor length gown right near work. So I got on the subway with a large external monitor and a gown like over my shoulder. It's very, very dramatic scene.
That is that's a New York moment.
It is.
What else do we want to talk about?
I think one thing that's really interesting that I thought was, so I know one of the parts that were kind of critical about the movie in terms of like, it was an article like fact checking the movie. And it was like, actually, it's mostly good, except the vaccine development is the part that is not that realistic, which is interesting because in the movie, basically, a few scientists developed this vaccine. They like tested on monkeys, and then one of the scientists basically injects herself after seeing the monkeys survived, and then that she's the test subject. And then we don't really know much else. I don't think they went through any trials or anything, and they just make the vaccine.
Yeah, it's basically
and start
right
distributing
to
it.
production.
Yeah, which obviously isn't how it actually works, and isn't how it worked in this pandemic. But they also talked about how short this cycle was to develop the vaccine, which in 2020 was very criticized in the movie because you're like, well, no vaccine's ever been developed in, I think, like 8 months like it is in the movie. And it's pretty funny, actually, because we actually came pretty close to developing a vaccine, or scientists came pretty close to developing a vaccine in about 8 months. I think the irony is the part that actually is unrealistic in the movie is in the movie, everyone takes the vaccine, presumably, and the pandemic's over. And that's not what's happened in real life in our world, obviously.
Right. And we had a good head start in vaccine development because, we know about coronaviruses in general. So, it through lots of wonderful scientific effort, we were able to do it. But yeah, I think that's one of the saddest parts of the movie to watch is exactly, what we were talking about earlier around vaccine hesitancy. And it seems, of course, the movie ends, you see like one almost normal scene. And you don't really know, I guess, what happens next. And did everyone actually get it? Was it effective long term? But I think that was hard. It was like, well, what about next year? Like, are you going to be normal? Like a normal life? Like, it's like an acute emergency, which is not how this feels anymore. It's like we need a Contagion Part 2, the slow return to normalcy.
There is a level of breakdown of society in the movie that would be hard to just be like coming back from, because people abandon their houses.
Totally. Right.
People break into their neighbors' houses and like steal guns.
Right.
Supposedly the hero of that segment of the movie breaks into his neighbor's house and takes a gun.
Absolutely. Yep.
After seeing a murder across the street.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if that's ever like specifically resolved. So he sees and hears gunshots from across the street, and then sees people like leaving with hunting rifles, and tries to call 911, and he's put into a phone tree, which I thought was pretty funny.
That was funny. And yeah, I totally forgot about that part of the movie. We never know what happened there.
Yeah. And when he goes to the neighbor's house the next day, I'm expecting him to like find dead bodies there or something. But no, I guess it was a different neighbor, and he was just going there to steal guns.
Right. Yeah. It was, there was, of course, like timing wise parallel chaos with this pandemic in terms of, all of the, like George Floyd was murdered, all of that. So I think there was a similar kind of hectic feeling that happened for a good chunk of time. It wasn't all, pandemic related, but it wasn't pandemic unrelated.
Yeah. Pandemic amplified maybe.
Exactly. So I think, there are definitely moments that felt like, at least in some places, a return to normalcy would be odd. And I think that might still be true, right? In places like New York City, they certainly won't feel the same, I think, for a very long time. So
Yeah, place where I work in Boston still has plexiglass over all the first floor windows. So
Wow.
that's,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that is interesting. One other like sciencey thing that I thought was interesting is like the R naught, that scene where they're talking about the R naught, which basically means like for every person who gets sick, how many people do they get sick? So this virus and Contagion it had a much higher mortality rate. They said, I think around like 20% or something. The R naught was 2, which was closer to original COVID strains, but now like Omicron's way higher than that. We're dealing with a much more contagious virus than they were there. So it's just interesting to think about, they're talking fomites or whatever, and, touch surface stuff, but, just watching people with a less contagious virus than we're dealing with, not all being masked was kind of unnerving.
Yeah, the lack of masking for anyone that wasn't about to die was
Right.
kind of surprising.
Right. Even Erin Mears' character at some points, she was like touring a facility and she was telling people, again, we're dealing with a different virus, but she was telling people not to touch things. I'm like, where's your mask?
Yeah. I think the first time she wore a mask was when she got that guy off the bus. And then she becomes sick soon after. I was like, if you had a mask, why weren't you just wearing it the whole time? Like, why did you wait for this guy to be highly contagious and you walked right up to him?
Right. Yeah, it seemed like people were only wearing masks when they knew they were interacting with people who were sick. Yeah. So
I think the movie, though, didn't they say that in the movie the virus mutated at some point and the R naught increased? I can't remember what it went from.
Yeah, it interacted with like an HIV community.
Yes,
they said.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, they I remember it was in South Africa. They mentioned Durban, so that was interesting because, like, of course, Omicron was first reported in South Africa. It doesn't mean it first occurred there, but a South Africa mutation situation was just another little COVID-related spot in the movie.
He's nailing it.
I know, right?
So I have a note here. Is the real Contagion the virus or fake news?
I forgot the Jude Law character there's a scene where he's like putting signs under people's windshield wipers that say something like CDC lies.
CDC lies. There's a cure that they don't want to give you. It's forsythia, I think, in the movie.
Yes. Yeah. Fake news, definitely the real pandemic here.
That's the real Contagion.
Which, I think it's pretty interesting. Like, in our pandemic world, not that I recall, at least, we didn't have too many, cures or whatever you want to call them before the vaccine came out. I think like a lot of them.
None that like people we know used.
Yeah.
I mean, there's bleach.
But in the movie, I don't think in the movie there's any vaccine skeptics, right? Like once the vaccine's out,
right.
Presumably everyone's taking it. So all the conspiracy theory stuff is like pre-vaccine, which I guess if the death rate's 20%, you're a lot more desperate than if it's like, 1-ish% what we're dealing with. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic, though, to think about.
Jude Law does specifically threaten to tell his followers to not take the vaccine. But he doesn't really give a reasoning. He kind of just says, like, just because I want to be chaotic.
And that's before he's arrested, right?
Yeah. And kind of as he's being arrested.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
And the U.S. government's like,
Right.
We're going to put together a 30-person sting team to chase you down.
Right. And I do wonder, like, I personally know people who weren't vaccinated, got sick, and then received like monoclonal antibody treatments. So I do wonder if there was that, of course, is not widely available and is still in a lottery system. Some places, lots of, criteria you have to meet. I do wonder if there was something that was like a forsythia, if there would be kind of riots over it, like there were there. Because I think,
right.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, when within 5 seconds of being told we only have 50 doses of forsythia, someone throws a chair through a pane of glass at a pharmacist.
Right.
Within the first, literally, I think within the first 15 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think anybody, like when you're sick, you're desperate, right? Like anybody is willing to take that.
If you're like, well, I mean, especially this particular in the movie disease where it's like, well, people are going to die right quick.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely some moments of desperation in the movie. We see people like fighting for food from like National Guard trucks or Army trucks or something like that. Presumably they don't have access to food otherwise.
Right.
That's pretty scary to think about. And thankfully we haven't had to deal with in our pandemic. We see one character, approach, I think his name's Alan, Jude Law's character, asking for forsythia directly. He doesn't give it to her, tells her to bring it to her later, never does, and she dies. So, kind of those moments of desperation where there's like kind of hopelessness for people or something like that. Or, I think when people are turning on each other and behaving very selfishly is that's probably some of the scariest things to me, really.
Totally.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's like a zombie movie, because a lot of zombie movies, the moral is always like monsters are other people.
Right.
That's who you actually have to look out for in a zombie apocalypse.
It's like trampling. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Trampling, betrayal, and just general evil, forces.
Right. And we didn't experience that, but I think there were like threads of it that felt really scary, right? Like when we're rationing toilet paper.
I was gonna say toilet paper.
Like I remember going to the grocery store. This is in New York, but there were single rolls of toilet paper, and they were selling them 5 for $4 or 4 for $5. I don't remember, but it was like a single wrapped roll of Scott toilet paper. It's like the worst. Jeffrey really gets mad when I buy Scott toilet paper, so it's bad.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Don't sue Ben. Scott toilet paper.
It's a great spot though if you want to put Tushy ad in here or something.
Yeah, we'll play the jingle and be like, "Is your ass hurting? Maybe you need to stop using sandpaper."
Hey, I mean, truthfully, I bought a bidet. The
Totally,
pandemic, and it's changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I assume he'd be on the bidet train if he was still alive today. But there was a comedian named John Panette who was, who died actually pretty young. I think he was in his 50s. He just died a few years ago, and he had a great bit that was he'd done some acting and stuff, and even when he was just like a struggling actor in New York, his bit was, and I'm not going to try to deliver like him because he was very funny, and I'm not. As poor as I got, as much as I ever struggled, I never bought bad toilet paper. There's just like one thing you can never do, and that's like you have to not buy bad toilet paper.
Invest. Yeah. Invest in your TP.
Invest in toilet paper.
For sure.
It's important.
It is important. Didn't
here? Oh, right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think Jeffrey and his friends like split fancy toilet paper.
Yeah,
like,
that was a very lucky coincidental thing. We like signed up for, I can't remember the like bamboo toilet paper company that's online, and we had like a stockpile of toilet paper that we were all sharing. So like people were like, "I'm running out," and we're like, "Oh man, well sorry, we get like dozens of rolls," and we probably gave a few away to people, but
oh my god, sucks to be you, but I'm all set.
It was yeah, pretty much. Like I was never worried about toilet paper for a second. I'm not gonna lie. Like it was great. So I
wasn't worried about it either, but that was one of the like. I'm sure in New York it was different, but here it's just like, well, if people stop freaking out and buying all the toilet paper, there'll be toilet paper for everyone.
I'm sure that would have been true in New York, but yeah, we were out of it for sure.
Yeah, like the local Target here ran out of toilet paper because the people who went in there for their shopping bought 10 times as much toilet paper as normal.
It's just so bizarre.
And Target hadn't supply chain planned to be selling that much toilet paper.
Right.
It's not that there is no toilet paper. So they didn't think you'd need that much.
Right, exactly. Or flour for all of the bread.
Yeah, say like Lysol wipes had the same issue, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
hand sanitizer very acutely.
Was
yeah, hand sanitizer was like gold for a while there.
For sure. Yeah, and like
it's gonna be hard to explain that.
Yes.
Like that and dial up. Never gonna be able to explain.
Yeah. And distilleries were making hand sanitizer.
Yeah, I bought some from a distillery. Yep.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I thought
probably pretty good.
That and one interesting thing, kind of supply related in the movie, is they were talking about I forgot what it was, a drug that could treat the virus in Contagion, which we're just calling the virus in Contagion. It doesn't have a name, right?
MEV, MEV1, I think.
Oh yes, okay, right. We were trying to remember.
They didn't use it very ubiquitous.
No, it wasn't like COVID. It wasn't a catchy name, catchy virus, but not a catchy name. They were talking about how they didn't want to, in the news interview segment, they were saying that, oh, you don't want to tell anyone about this drug until you've stockpiled it. And that was interesting because there was a moment at the beginning of the COVID pandemic where the CDC was saying something very different than they are now about masks. And, you know, we later kind of all realized like, oh, you know, there aren't enough masks and they need them for healthcare workers. So that's why we weren't being told to use them. And, you know, there are, of course, not enough tests now. So it's interesting thoughts about like what a lack of supply does to public information during a pandemic.
We have like a rather entrepreneurial local manufacturer who mostly does textiles, clothing and stuff for retail, but they swapped and they changed up their business and made, I think, like over 1 million gowns and wow. They made masks and stuff during the pandemic and tried to sell them all over the country and stuff. The very same business, I think, just received 500,000 tests that they're now selling out of their warehouse.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, it was cool to see how quick, you know, you can actually flip to make things, even vents. You know, there were companies that just started making vents.
Yeah, for sure. If you know, need tests, as a PSA, the government website went up today.
A day early.
That you can get them delivered through the USPS. It's just like covidtest.gov or something. I don't know. It's something like that.
I'll find out.
It'd be probably good to have like
public
some
health
actual. Yeah. And each household, not person, each household gets 4. So every, you know, in Joe Biden's America, a mommy, a daddy, and 2 kids, every family. So that's your 4. That's your 4 COVID tests.
Or if you're dinks like us, 2 apiece.
2 apiece.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's USPS.com/COVID test.
There you go.
You can get
I'll cut out the part where I was wrong to avoid, you know, accidental Jude Lawing of information.
Ben doesn't want you to get COVID tests.
I want them all for me. I'm going to use assumed names.
Send them to Ben's P.O. box.
You should get a P.O. box for mischief.
You should. Absolutely. All the best podcasters have one.
Yeah. A subterfuge specific P.O. box. What else do we want to hit on?
One like other nerdy public health thing was a comment made by Laurence Fishburne's character, I think also in the news interview, about how it's so complicated because all of the states have their own policies to deal with. And that was like moment for me because of course we're living that right now. States
we super are.
It's like almost like we need a coordinated national public health system. So I thought that was, it was a really brief moment, but one that I think a lot of us are seeing for the first time. So.
It's really sad to be behind Britain in such an important area.
Right. It just is. Yeah. And especially in Massachusetts, like every city and town has their own health department, which is just bananas. It's like half an FTE in the town we grew up in. So
yeah, it is pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the part of the movie kind of along those lines too is when they shut down the state borders and they can't cross over the bridge. That part's pretty crazy. So Matt Damon basically figures out that he's immune to the virus for whatever reason, which that's a whole separate thing that's really strange, to be honest, never explained. But he doesn't know about his daughter, so he's really concerned about her. And they try to flee to another state to get away, and they're turned around by like the National Guard or something, or police or whatever, on a bridge. I think that's another part that's like really, kind of scary. It's like, you can't escape, you can't drive away. And I think it was kind of a bit early on in the movie, if I recall, but it actually is pretty scary in terms of just the overall pandemic. I mean, I've had this thought many times in 2020. It's like, I think your inclination is to try to get away. And you're like, oh, maybe I could, can fly somewhere else, like, fly to Europe, fly to Asia or something like that, somewhere where there's not the virus. But it's everywhere pretty much anyway. And B, there aren't any more flights anymore. You're not allowed to leave, you're not allowed to enter, things like that. So like, I think that really hits home. Like, if there's a hurricane or something like that, like usually you can escape by driving away. Maybe you're not as lucky to get away fast enough or something like that. But pandemic, there's really no escaping it as long as you're on this planet.
Right. Pandemics and comets, really hard to escape from. Yeah, I know. I agree. That was a really sad and desperate scene for sure. Him just like I don't have, we're not sick, and can't leave.
Yeah, I love that scene when he tells the guy, like, when the guy's like, get back in your car, I'll detain you. And he just goes, where?
Right.
The guy just goes, just get back in your car.
Right, I'll detain you into your car.
It's like, come on, man, just go away.
Right.
Like, I can't let you cross the bridge.
I know. Yeah, bridges are an interesting thing like that. I remember, I mentioned earlier the kind of rumors that they were going to like lock down New York City, but it was like, oh yeah, I can't leave without crossing a bridge. Yeah. That's true around here too.
I think that happened during Hurricane Katrina as well. That's what I thought of, at least. They locked down some bridges or something, and I think they might have shot at people. I could be wrong, but that's what I thought of, was like, wow, like you're really just like kind of condemning people to live in this dire situation.
Yeah. If anyone's listening from Cape Cod.
Yeah, it's tough. And so often, maybe not with Cape Cod, but so often it does kind of go along. My thought's always Titanic, right? It's the third class people that you're just like, no, everyone stay where you are. But it's like, okay, well, I'm in a very disadvantageous location,
right?
And you're fine. So it's easy for you to say, everyone just stay where you are.
True, not true of the Cape, yeah.
But
I think people in Cape Cod actually wanted the bridges to be closed, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. They're like, let's just leave us alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's super true that it's, often places that don't have resources to begin with. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jeffrey and I have a COVID love story. We can tell you about that.
Oh yeah, go for it.
More of a COVID circumstance love story, but we were both in separate cities. I was in New York City. Jeffrey mentioned he was in Portland, Oregon. And I didn't come home for several months, home to Massachusetts. And I eventually visited over the summer, and my dad built a little apartment next to his house and was like, Kate, why don't you just stay here? You're working out of your bedroom in New York City. And, just why, for the foreseeable future, why don't you just come hang here? And Jeffrey, you can tell kind of what life was like in Portland for you.
Yeah, I mean, I was living alone in Portland, just felt very isolated. It was, people were being very cautious. It was hard to get together people. A lot of things were closed. So it was just pretty hard. Portland winters are very dark and rough, and like in a normal year in Portland, I don't really enjoy the winter there, never mind one where I'm pretty much confined to my apartment. So I was like, hey, I think I'm going to go back, home to where my family is and parents are in Rhode Island and stay with them for a bit. I was actually planning to build out a camper van and maybe drive around in that. That was my idea. And I would just be out here and, actually have other people to be around and be with, like with my parents, versus just being kind of stuck in an apartment by myself in Portland.
And that was around the time that the wildfires were really bad in Portland as well.
The Portland, there were bad wildfires in Oregon in August, September of 2020. And that was kind of like the last straw for me. I was not going to be stuck in my apartment any longer with wildfires outside and a pandemic going on. And I just kind of had enough for a while. And so I packed up my things and I drove out of Portland in October 2020 and set my sights for Rhode Island and arrived about 3 weeks later.
Right. Visited all the national parks on the way.
Yeah.
And then I was here. And so our families live about 10 minutes apart from each other. And I was here visiting. It was my birthday, and I had just decided that I was going to move back home in December. And while I was sitting on my dad's couch, I opened up OkCupid, and it was his first day here. He did the same. And we came across each other that day and messaged. And that was, a year and change ago, and haven't looked back. So it's COVID love story for the ages.
There you go. Tale as old as time.
Yeah. And we just bought a house together while I was COVID positive. So
that is true.
Full circle.
Bought a house and signed the closing documents from the car, wearing masks and gloves and staying away from the closing attorney. And yeah, it really has been a COVID love story.
That's adorable. So COVID's been great for you guys. It's pretty much all positive.
yeah, I don't.
So what do you think? It seems like they got like a lot of stuff spot on in this movie. Anything like big that they got wrong? I mean, we've talked about the vaccine willingness / hesitancy part, but
That's a good question.
it seems like they're really prescient in a lot of areas. But
Yeah, other than what we already covered, and don't know if there's like a whole lot else.
Yeah, there wasn't. So I should say I'm not an epidemiologist. But
I mean, they couldn't have known about the president being like one of the main problems.
Right, exactly. They couldn't have known that. But there was nothing from a public health standpoint that, as a master's level social behavioral public health person, I was like, wow, like absolutely not. So I thought they did a pretty good job, and it seemed, pretty well researched, at least in terms of roles and things like that.
Oh, you know what someone I just thought of was?
What?
I thought it was interesting in the movie, they distribute the vaccine by birth date.
Yeah, it was like a war draft.
Yeah, it's like, which, I mean, we obviously didn't do that here. We did it by age, which was smart, I think.
Well, it didn't quite seem like they didn't get into this, but I guess this could be a potential hole here. It didn't seem like the virus affected people differently by age or right. health conditions. So
yeah.
I guess that was pretty weird. I don't know that most viruses would behave like that. But
that's probably the one thing that they were told about, but maybe just decided for the sake of expediency,
right,
and drama for it to be like Gwyneth Paltrow, who's in good shape, and then also like a literal child being the first deaths that you see
and dying so fast. And you have no idea. And of course we don't like know their health histories, but they, I guess if we had no clue, that people who were older had a higher mortality rate, then something like that could have happened. But it does almost seem more dystopian because of that. It seems, it's like the Hunger Games also, aside from a war draft, that they're just kind of picking birthdays. So,
yeah, I think it's a little more, I don't know, feels a little more like visceral in a way. You're like, oh wow, like it is a lot about luck here versus circumstance.
Totally. Yeah. And lots of the ways that vaccination worked here were not entirely fair, I guess, either, right? Like, sure. I counted as a healthcare worker despite being remote. I got to get my vaccine really early. There are lots of folks who, by circumstance of work and whatever, couldn't get to vaccine sites. We did a pretty bad job kind of meeting people where they were at in terms of vaccination. So, I don't know. I don't know what the perfect vaccine delivery system is, but that one did kind of seem creepy.
Or like Laurence Fishburne says, or someone suggested you just put it in the water, right?
Right. Just like fluoride it up.
Yeah. Yeah, that seemed like a shock because he was like, the Department of Defense wants to know if we can just put it in the water. And then like the two scientists looked at each other like, these motherfuckers.
That's not a bad question though, I think, from like a layperson standpoint, right?
Yeah, I'm sure the Department of Defense is like, like if no one asked and we could have done that, then like we'd feel stupider.
Yeah, it's like kind of like, good idea, but no, you can't.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You may not.
This is why everyone hates scientists.
Right.
They're just always trying to get one over.
Exactly.
So, what else do we want to cover? Okay, so now that you've seen it for the first time, and now that you've rewatched it for a second time in a little over a year and a half or 2 years or whatever it's been, would you guys recommend this? Specifically for someone who has missed out on this.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. I thought it was a good movie. It was I think the style of it made it move quickly, that kind of hyperlink style. It's definitely unnerving. I think the fact that you figure out how it originated and kind of have some sense of hope at the end make it a little less unnerving than it could have been. I would not have recommended it in 2020. I think that was a wild move by Jeffrey to rewatch it. But now that we're all just deeply steeped in the pandemic,
I think it's
now.
So
we're in it for sure, but we know what we're in for. I think if you'd watched this right at the beginning of COVID times, it would seem a lot scarier.
At this point, it's more just like trading war stories.
Exactly. It's like they're probably better than we are. So yeah, I think it's a safe emotional watch for most people, and I'd recommend it.
Cool.
Yeah, I would as well. I mean, aside from what Kate said, Really great cast, a lot of A-list actors in this film. So I think that, lends a lot to the performance. It's a unique format in terms of, what we're talking about with the parallel storylines and all that. So I think it's a really enjoyable watch, and I think a lot of people will relate to it a lot more closely now than they would have when it first came out in 2011.
For sure. And Gwyneth Paltrow makes a very creepy autopsy subject. So for that alone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so many people that aren't in it for that much. I think she was on set for like one day or something.
One day?
Just,
Wow.
like, bang it out.
Wow, that's wild.
She's only on screen with Matt Damon for a minute.
Right,
so
right. Yeah. And the flashbacks to the casino are.
Yeah.
Those
are all just like in sequence with each other. She might have just. They're just like, oh, go hang out in the casino. We'll film you for an hour.
Right. And they just like pause every time she touches someone.
Yeah.
But that was really great. And I rewatched parts of it. Because again, we were supposed to record this a few weeks ago. I did not realize that was her lover / ex, John Neal. I think his last name's definitely Neal. It was him that gets taken out in the ambulance right after.
Oh yeah.
Until I rewatched it, that was kind of a wild.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. We never actually see him, but we see like his dead body or some sort of housekeeping person finding his dead body.
I assumed it was his partner, but who knows?
Okay.
Yeah. But there's they had to throw in the affair. So
yeah, that is. I love Soderbergh in his movies, and some of the dialogue in this is really weird. I feel like he usually has good dialogue, but this is written by Scott Z. Burns. I don't want to cast aspersions at anyone, but some of the stuff's really clunky. But I do like the line where Matt Damon's like, "Did John Neal do this to us?" They always like refer to him by his full name.
Right.
It's just very funny to me.
Wait, was he talking to the nurse and the?
Yeah. Or Kate
Yeah.
Winslet, I think at that point.
We were wondering.
Yes.
I actually couldn't tell if that was Kate
I think
Winslet.
I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Winslet.
I was like staring
She's
at
just
her.
like, I can't say anything or something.
Right.
It would make sense that she would interview him, was my thing.
I agree. The person just like looked like they had, maybe a brunette, and they just she was in Full Battle Rattle, kind of interviewing Matt Damon, and she says, "Did you know anyone in Chicago or something?" And he's like, "Well, my wife's was in a relationship with someone in Chicago before me," and that's when he realizes that she was having an affair, and that's kind of a through line, like when he's talking to Gwyneth Paltrow's mom. She's like, she
made some mistakes, but she really loved you.
Right.
I mean, I guess for Matt Damon, the best part of the story is she actually killed John Neal. So
she did kill John. I wonder if he finds out.
Yeah. But later on, Kate Winslet tells Laurence Fishburne on the phone that like, oh, how do you tell a guy whose wife just died that she was cheating on him?
Right.
So that's why it's I'm pretty sure it's Kate Winslet.
Right. Yeah.
That's rough.
I know.
So would I recommend this? Yeah, I like it a lot. Someone else I was talking to, it was part of an episode. Well, it was someone that I just did an episode with, so I can't remember if it was part of it or not. But my cousin I was talking to and saying, we're doing Contagion next. It's going to be the first Soderbergh that we do on the podcast. He was like, that's a wild choice. You don't want to do like the Oceans movies or, anything that he's been nominated for stuff for. But whatever, we'll do more Soderberghs. I like him a lot, but I would definitely recommend this movie. It's really fascinating. It moves. It's such a crazy clip. It's just so smooth. His movies are always edited really, really with a fine point. I don't know what I'm trying to say. An extremely sharp knife, whatever. They fly though. They're like almost frictionless. They just zoom. Sometimes we have a little game at the end. Are you guys ready to take a quiz?
Yes.
Let's do it.
I look normally for to steal someone else's quizzes, and I take them from like, let's see, like, what's like a funny place to take it from? BoiseState.edu. Sure. So from BoiseState.edu.
Shout out to Taylor Bird, my friend who went to Boise State.
Really?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice. They got that blue football field. Kind of like makes you think your TV's broken. History quiz, pandemic edition.
Oh.
Written by a doctor, Todd Shallett. Not quite spelled like the onion. It's a multiple choice, and we'll just keep track of your points. I got a few of these. I don't know if we'll get through all of them. They're not like they're interesting from a quiz standpoint, but I don't know if they're from a trivia standpoint that great. No offense to Dr. Shallot, but we'll do what we can. Okay. Number 1. This epidemic helped forge the American two-party system. In Philadelphia, as the death toll mounted, Federalists accused Democrats of a biological terror campaign. Was it smallpox, the Great Plague of Marseille, or yellow fever?
Tell me first.
Yeah,
Sure.
She's trying to psych you out.
I'm gonna go with yellow.
Staring you down.
I'm gonna go with yellow fever.
Yeah.
I was also going to go with yellow fever.
You're both right. It's yellow fever. 1-1. In February 1692, in the Massachusetts village of Salem, 8 young women accused their neighbors of witchcraft. Some historians blame the hysteria on a viral fever spread by insects and birds. Is it bird flu, encephalitis, or typhoid?
Typhoid.
Call that encephalitis.
It's encephalitis.
No.
Jeffrey leads 2-1. A trade deal with China unleashed one of the deadliest of the great pandemics. Italy was hit especially hard. Was it the plague of Justinian, COVID-19, or bubonic plague?
I guess I'm going to go bubonic plague on this one.
I was going to go with COVID. I don't know if it was a trade deal, but Italy was hit especially hard.
It was bubonic plague. So he's got a 2-point lead now. A London doctor used a dot map to pioneer the modern science of epidemiology during this one. Is it the third cholera pandemic, the Great Plague of London, or typhus, aka Irish fever?
Cholera.
I was going to go with the first one, A.
It is the third cholera pandemic, so you both got that one. This one has an all of the above option, so
Okay.
be aware. Scientists blamed stressed out bats and their habitat loss for this 21st century pandemic. Is it COVID-19, Ebola, SARS, or all of the above?
All of the above.
I'm going to go with SARS.
It is all of the above.
Oh, nice.
So you cut the lead to 1.
Yes.
And we have 2 left, so... yeah.
All right.
Charles IV of Spain launched history's first global immunization campaign. Pathogens from a diseased cow passed arm to arm in a human chain from the Canary Islands to the Americas and then on to the Philippines. I guess this doctor is implying that people floated in the ocean arm to arm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it means.
They met in the middle.
Is it whooping cough, rubella, smallpox?
Smallpox.
Or also smallpox.
Of course it's smallpox. Come on. Called the romantic disease, this affliction was hailed in Victorian times as poetic inspiration. Franz Kafka, John Keats, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Edgar Allan Poe, and Fyodor Dostoevsky all romanticized the disease. Victor Hugo, however, had it cripple the spine of Notre Dame's famous hunchback. Is that diphtheria, Spanish flu, or tuberculosis?
Tuberculosis? No, diphtheria.
I'm going to go tuberculosis.
It's tuberculosis.
Darn.
He retakes the 2-point lead and the game. Congratulations to Jeffrey. I have no prize to offer you.
Can I have a degree in public health now?
Apparently.
I am just not an infectious disease
If
expert.
that's all it takes.
Apparently I am. No.
I do have to recommend a Twitter account on the subject of cholera and the founding of epidemiology. Jon Snow was like the person who figured out to turn off the water pump. There's a great Twitter that's neoliberal Jon Snow. And it's all about, you know, what Jon Snow would have to be saying if people were reacting to cholera like they're reacting to COVID.
It has nothing to do with Game of Thrones.
Nothing to do with Game of Thrones. Different Jon Snow, perhaps the the namesake, but yeah, things like the businesses on Broad Street were complaining, so I reinstalled the water pump. Are the tweets, and they're fantastic. So
fantastic. All right. Well, before we end, real quick, not to get into labor issues and digital media, but do you guys know the AV Club? It's a website.
I do. Yeah.
So I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast if not for Classic AV Club. And even lately, you know, for the last several years, even though there's been so much turnover with AV Club and any other publication owned by Geo Media, I still read them pretty regularly, but that's probably ending. They recently, GO Media, the corporate vulture / vampires that took over the former Gawker kind of consortium of web pages, including Onion Media, which owns AV Club. They recently, last month, sent a letter to the 9 full-time employees of the AV Club, which has been based in Chicago since it's, with the Onion since its inception a long time ago, that their jobs are now in Los Angeles. And
what?
Their jobs are now in Los Angeles, and they are welcome to go there if they want. They were not offering any cost of living increase or any relocation in money. Just your jobs are now in Los Angeles, in a very obvious and bald-faced effort to force out the expensive editors who've been there forever. Which succeeded. Earlier today, those employees all announced that they would be leaving AV Club, and I guess I'm not going to read it anymore.
That is a huge bummer because
Yeah,
remote work is so easy these days.
Yes, it's incredibly easy, and so
thinly veiled effort.
Thinly veiled effort. They are part of a union. That's so they do get severance packages that the union fought for. Unlike the very publicized Deadspin walkout of a little while ago, those people, and if a similar thing could happen with the AV Club, it'd be pretty cool. But for the most part, they all scatter into different digital media directions. Subscribe to Defector. That's where all the Deadspin people went, and it's a lot better than zombie Deadspin as it exists now. And it's owned by the people who actually write the articles, and they all make more money this way, I hope. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is
It was a lot of
fun.
fun.
Yeah, Kate, Jeffrey, we'll have you on again soon. And that's just a thing that people who host shows say, I guess. Yeah,
Not
and,
true. He hates us.
roll credits. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.